Amy had only been in her job at Harriman Manufacturing for about 3 months when she realized she and Mr. Harriman's administrative assistant secretary were friends. At first, when she ate in the employees' dining room, she would eat with her friends from the marketing department. One day, Janet Daly came up to her and asked if she could join her at the table. Amy was surprised at how much they had in common, and before long they ate lunch together every time Janet was in the office. Sometimes they ate in the dining room and sometimes they went out. The two young women talked about all the things young 20-somethings talk about. Most of their conversations dealt with clothes, their friends, their husbands, and, of course, their past and sex. One day, Janet nudged Amy and whispered, "Just look at the buns on that one. I bet he could drive it so deep it would come out your mouth." Amy looked and blushed, but then laughed and said, "Yeah, and I'd give him forever to quit. He's a real hunk, isn't he?" After that day, the ice seemed to be broken, and they talked more and more about sex in their college days and the days before they got married. Janet learned Amy liked her sex and was a party girl. Amy learned Janet liked more than one. About 2 months after Amy realized she and Janet were friends, Mr. Harriman's administrative assistant took a similar job with another company. Janet came into the lunchroom that day almost bouncing with excitement. She was beaming when she sat at the table with Amy. "Oh, Amy," she said, "I've just come from Mr. Harriman's office. Clara, his administrative assistant, has taken a job with another company and he offered me her job. Isn't that great? Oh, I've looked forward to this for so long." Amy smiled at Janet, then said, "I'm so happy for you. I know how you've wanted the job, but I'm sure going to miss our lunches. You'll be gone so much more I'll almost never see you now." Janet laughed and said, "Oh, pooh. You'll see me more, I bet. Mr. Harriman gave me permission to ask you to interview with him tomorrow morning for the job as my assistant. Do you want it?" "Oh, my God. Yes. I'd love to be your assistant. Do you think I'll get it?" Amy asked. Amy could hardly sleep that night and was at work way too early the next morning. She had dressed in her best, most sexy work dress and was still worried she didn't look nice enough or professional enough to impress Mr. Harriman. As soon as he came in, Mr. Harriman sent for Amy. When she came into his office, he looked her over closely and said, "Well, Amy, Janet spoke about you in glowing terms. I feel like this interview is almost a formality, but there are a few things I need to find out about you before we offer you the job. I need to see how you interact with senior members of management, and I need to discuss some of the job requirements with you." When he said that, Mr. Harriman walked around his desk and sat in the chair beside Amy. He put his hand on her thigh and leaned toward her. He looked her in the eye when he asked, "You know, this job requires a lot of late nights and travel. There are times you will be with me more during any 24-hour period than you will your husband. Will that be a problem?" Amy flinched when she felt his hand on her leg, but didn't do anything about it. She wanted this promotion so badly she didn't want to do anything to upset Mr. Harriman. She thought about his question a moment, then said, "No, Mr. Harriman. It won't be a problem for me, and I am sure I can make my husband understand." Mr. Harriman left his hand on her leg as he continued to question Amy. There were several more questions, but they just seemed to be the fill-in-the-time type. As he talked, Mr. Harriman gently moved his fingers in small circles on her thigh. Amy felt a strange sensation in her body. She was biting her lip, and it was all she could do not to moan out her need. By the time Mr. Harriman finally decided to end the interview and get up, Amy was sitting with her legs splayed as he rubbed her thighs. Mr. Harriman walked around behind her and placed his hand on Amy's shoulder. Mr. Harriman smiled and said, "Well, Amy, I think you will work out fine. If Janet is okay with you, I sure am." They both looked over at Janet to see her nodding yes. When he began to move away from Amy, he let his hand draw up her chest to her shoulder. He smiled once again and started to walk away from Amy toward his chair. Amy jumped up from her chair and wrapped her arms around Mr. Harriman. She said, "Oh, thank you, Mr. Harriman. Thank you so much." She blushed and jumped back from him and stammered, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I'm just so excited and happy Mr. Harriman laughed and looked into her eyes, then said, "That's fine, Amy. And since we're going to be working so closely together, you need to start calling me Howard now. Why don't you go with Janet, and she will start filling you in on your new job and get the paperwork sorted out." Amy was so ecstatic about her new job she could hardly wait to get home and tell Jeffrey, her husband. She loved the new salary, nearly double her old salary, and the perks that went with the job. The initial training was very easy and simple. Janet first showed her the paperwork associated with the job, but that was nothing new. She had been doing most of that before in her position as marketing assistant. The only new things she had to learn were setting up business meetings and entertainment for customers and vendors. Some of the first conversations she and Janet had explaining the rest of the job duties made her feel so young and naive. Amy laughed to herself when she thought that. Heck, she was only 26 now. She was surprised they would set up nights out for their customers and suppliers, though especially to strip clubs or with escorts. After she had been in her new position for 6 months, Janet asked her to help with a dinner meeting the next night after work. This was the first meeting she had been asked to attend, although she had set several of them up for Janet. When Amy arrived at the restaurant, she was not surprised to find herself escorted into a private room. All the special sales meetings were in private rooms. She believed that was in case one of the customers brought an escort or in case they wanted to talk business. There was a table in the center of the room with 6 chairs around it. Janet was already there and welcomed Amy with a smile and gentle kiss on the cheek. She said, "There is a small bar in the corner. Help yourself, then come over here and sit with me a few minutes, Amy. I need to fill you in on the protocol before Howard and our guests arrive." Amy poured herself a glass of Chablis and sat primly beside Janet. She had been surprised when she entered the room and first saw Janet. She looked so hot. Janet had changed into a small sheer cocktail dress plunging low in the front and ending mid-thigh. When she took her seat on the low couch beside Janet, she was surprised again. Janet didn't have a bra on any longer. Of course, the bras the two of them wore at work did nothing to conceal anything. Normally, they only wore a half bra, and it was very sheer. After Amy was seated and comfortable, Janet smiled and asked, "Well, Amy, how do you like the office part of your new job? Do you feel comfortable with it now? Are you happy and ready to learn the more intricate and, truth being told, the more important social side of the position?" Amy answered, "Oh, yes. I am really enjoying working with you and Howard. It is so great meeting all the movers and shakers. I really feel like I am making an important contribution to the company now. For as long as I can remember, I have dreamed about being in a high-powered environment and working with high-powered people. As for learning the social side of the position, I'm not sure I understand what you mean." "Well, Amy," Janet said, "you know, one other aspect of our position is to coordinate evening festivities for some of our most valuable customers and suppliers. Also, from time to time, we travel out of town with Howard for conferences and sales presentations, as you recall. One of the very most important aspects of our position is to arrange for these meetings and to serve as hostess during them. Most of the time, we offer in-house entertainment instead of hiring escorts because we mix business with pleasure. We do everything in our power to satisfy the attendees no matter what it takes. You get my meaning?" Amy was a little hesitant when she responded, "Oh, well, I'm not sure. I certainly understand the requirement to set up the meetings, arrange entertainment, meals, lodging, and so forth. I'm a little unclear about the social aspects of the position." Janet laughed as she responded, "Well, don't worry about that. You are a young, vivacious, witty woman. From our talks before we interviewed you for the position, I decided you would perform admirably in that part of the job. Now, all you need to do tonight is observe and make yourself useful if someone wants a drink or something. I will make sure you are out of here early enough to get home at a decent hour. We will discuss tonight in more detail Monday morning." Amy and Janet visited a few more minutes before Howard came into the room with 3 other men. They had obviously been in a bar somewhere before they arrived at the restaurant. Janet and Amy stood and walked to meet them near the table. Amy remembered seeing all 3 of the guests that morning at the office. She was surprised when all 3 had hugged Janet and gave her a kiss when she greeted them. She was also surprised that Janet had let them fondle her before shooing them into Howard's office with a giggle. Amy remembered hearing a lot of loud laughing and conversation coming from the office most of the morning. Twice Janet had been called into the office and stayed for over a half hour each time. Both times she came back into the outer office looking flushed and with her hair and clothes in disarray. Amy just couldn't believe Janet was doing what it looked like she was doing, but was too embarrassed to ask. Now, seeing the way Janet was dressed, Amy once again wondered if Janet was cheating on her husband. She knew they had only been married a little over 2 years, and she just couldn't believe Janet would do something like that. Howard had reached out and put his arm around Amy when she and Janet walked up to him and the 3 strangers. He pulled her to his side and held her tightly while he introduced her. "This is Janet's assistant, Amy," he said. "She won't be with us for the entire evening. She's relatively new in the position and is still learning the ropes. We hope to have her up to speed for your next visit. We are still teaching her the job, and she has to get back home to her husband in good condition today." Amy had been surprised at the laughter that followed that statement, but she just put it down to their weird sense of humor. As soon as the men were seated, Amy and Janet were kept busy taking notes, providing copies of the contracts they were negotiating and making and delivering drinks. The men all insisted they sit at the table with them between deliveries, however. Amy and Janet sat with one of the guests on either side of them, and Howard sat on the other side of the table. After the business was finished, Amy had a couple of drinks with the men. Howard finally decided it was time to eat, and Amy let the waiter know it was time to serve the meal. All through the excellent meal, the man to Amy's left tried to get his hand under her skirt. She pushed him away several times and finally turned to him in exasperation. She was going to order him to stop in no uncertain manner. What she saw when she turned toward him left her speechless. Janet was kissing the man on her opposite side. He had his hand all the way down her dress and the strap off her shoulder. Amy watched in shock when the man that had been trying to get his hand up her dress turned to Janet and placed his hand on her bare leg. Amy watched him slowly run his hand under Janet's dress. Howard looked at Amy and smiled, then said, "Amy, it looks like Janet is busy right now. Would you please get everyone more to drink? And then, unless you want to stay and play with us, I suppose you should run on home. I think Janet can handle the rest of the evening." Amy was to remember that first evening in vivid detail for years. She left the conference room horny. Jeffrey was still up when she got home and was worried about her when he saw how she looked. She wouldn't tell him what the problem was, but did say, "Oh, honey." After the business part of the meal, Howard, Janet, and the 3 customers wanted to do some socializing. Howard said he and Janet could take care of the rest of the business, so I came on home. Some of the things Janet did and said tonight just worried and surprised me. It's nothing for you to worry about. I'm sure we will clear it up Monday. Amy worried about what Janet was doing to her husband all that weekend. She was no closer to an answer Monday morning than she had been that Friday night. Janet's ready smile and welcome Monday left Amy wondering once more. She was sure she could not have done what Janet did Friday evening, then acted so normal the next Monday. Janet heard Amy's quiet "good morning" when she entered their office and looked at her in concern. "Amy, what's wrong?" she asked. Amy fidgeted and couldn't look Janet in the face when she answered. "Nothing at all, Janet. How could you do something like that to Danny? I mean, you let those men." Janet broke out in her hearty, sunny laughter as she relaxed back into her chair. "Oh, my God, Amy. You're too much. I didn't do anything to Danny. All I did is my job and had a lot of fun while I did it. Danny has no idea what I do in our meetings and at our suppers, of course, and I hope to God he never finds out, but I didn't do anything to him. I know from our visits before you were promoted that you were a little wild before you got married. You told me how much you loved the sex with different men and were a little sorry you had to end it when you got serious with Jeffrey. Well, as my assistant, you can get some of that excitement back and enjoy yourself again and be paid very well for it to boot." Amy looked shocked as Janet continued. "What you saw last night was just me letting my hair down a little while we wined and dined the important men visiting our office. If I can get my horns dulled and get some strange while we do it, what's the big deal? It didn't cost Danny or me anything. In fact, we both benefit from my little trysts. I get some strange sex and for several days after Danny, and I get some great sex at home. I am so worked up and excited after I am with businessmen that I nearly screw him to death. You really ought to try it next time. Besides, statistical studies have shown 43% of married men admit cheating on their wives and over 27% of married women cheat on their husbands. Why shouldn't I have a little fun on the side since Danny probably is?" Amy just shook her head and said, "I never could do that to Jeffrey. I just couldn't." Janet laughed and responded, "Oh, come on. Are you trying to tell me you didn't go home horny as hell? I bet you were gushing before you even left the restaurant. I also bet you screwed Jeffrey blind this weekend. Now, didn't you?" Amy blushed and turned her head. Janet said again, "Didn't you?" Finally, Amy looked at Janet and blushed. She shook her head yes and whispered, "Yes, but I could never do what you did." Janet just looked at her and laughed. "Bullshit," she said. "I remember you telling me you pulled a train at your bachelorette party 2 weeks before you got married. If you can play around, then you sure can do it now. It's even safer to do it at our meetings because no one's going to run to Jeffrey and tattle now, are they? It's not something you have to do, though. It's just a little added benefit of our position. We have the opportunity to play with some movers and shakers. Men who aren't afraid to spend money to have a good time and who know how to screw a girl senseless. Don't worry about it. Just do your job and let me do mine, and you'll do fine. If I was wrong about you, let me know, and you can go back to your old job. Just please promise me you won't tell Danny I let my hair down at the meetings." Amy almost screamed when she said, "Oh, no, please. I don't want to go back to my old job. I like this job and I really, really want to move up in the company. I need this higher salary. I'll do my best to keep the customers happy." Amy felt guilty about what she had just promised Janet she would do and about helping Janet cheat. She did not want to rat her friend out, and she wanted the more prestigious position so badly she was willing to do anything to keep it. She had always admired rich men or men in powerful positions. She would do almost anything to associate with them. Amy promised to keep quiet about the activities at their meetings and to fully assist Janet. Amy did not see Janet smirk after the conversation ended, and she turned to her desk. Janet picked up her phone and called Howard. It was touch and go for a moment, but I think she is fully on board now. I had to remind her about her running a train around at her bachelorette party to bring her around, but I think she is ready for the next step. After the morning break, Howard came into the outer office and stopped before Janet's desk. Janet and Amy looked at him when he said, "You two were great Friday night. Amy, all three of the guys thought you were really hot and knew your job. They're looking forward to you joining in the negotiation session the next time they are in town." Howard turned to Janet and continued, "And thanks to you, Janet, we got the signatures we needed early this morning. Here's the bonus you earned last night for your assistance. I'm sorry it's only $10,000 this time, but the contract was only for a year with options to renew for another. Are you going to do something special with this bonus or squirrel it away like you have the others?" Janet smiled and asked, "What do you think? It always goes into the rat hole. Why would I change?" After Howard left, Amy sat and stared at Janet while she looked at the cash. She had never seen that much money in cash before. "What? I mean, you get $10,000. Janet laughed again at Amy and said, Amy, don't strain yourself. If someone does something extraordinary in the performance of their job, they should get a bonus, shouldn't they? Well, Howard believes I was instrumental in getting signatures on that contract, a contract that generates more per unit than the industry norm, I might add. Why shouldn't he give me a bonus for that? Of course, that isn't all I got out of it, is it?" She giggled again and winked at Amy. 3 weeks later, Amy was given responsibility for setting up the next meeting. She was told on a Tuesday morning that they needed to set up a meeting for 4 men a week from the next Thursday in a town over 1,200 miles away. She was given the responsibility of getting all the details for the hotel rooms, meeting room, meal, and drinks in order. Before she left for home the Tuesday evening before their Wednesday flight, Janet suggested she bring something more appropriate than business attire to wear to the meeting. She also said, "Honey, if you think you are going to be too late getting back to your own room Thursday evening, or if you will be busy when you get there, you might tell Jeffrey the cell service is blocked at this hotel meeting room. Actually, that isn't too far off, as you have to go outside for a good signal." The next morning, Amy was getting in her car to leave when she remembered what Janet had said. Jeffrey was about to get into his car also, so she yelled across the garage at him. She said, "Oh, honey, I almost forgot. Janet told me the hotel we are staying at in Sacramento gets really poor cell reception inside. It is cement construction, and some of the meeting rooms don't have any reception. If you can't get me, just leave a message or call the hotel switchboard." She dropped back into her car and backed out of the garage with a little smile on her face. Jeffrey had never asked what hotel she was staying at. Amy was so nervous the day of the meeting she could hardly function. Finally, after the room was set up, Janet pulled her over to the bar and poured her a good stiff glass of Glenlivet. "Drink up, honey. You look as pale as a sheet and are almost trembling. This is nothing but a business meeting and a little entertainment. Don't worry about it any further. We have 4 important men and Howard to entertain, and we certainly don't want you to be so nervous you can't help with it." By the time the dishes from the meal were cleared, the drinks and conversation had relaxed Amy. She and Janet had been busy delivering drinks to the men. At first, she tried to keep them from touching her, but as the night progressed, she started to enjoy the men's touches. When Amy finished delivering another round of drinks, she once again took her seat between the 2 businessmen she had been visiting with that night. She turned to ask the man on her right if he had everything he needed and gasped. She saw Janet and her 2 men beginning to play. When the man seated beside her turned to see what she gasped at, he grinned. "Well," he said, "looks like we need to get with the program, don't it, Amy?" After he said that, he leaned toward her for a kiss. Amy leaned toward him and returned the kiss. Amy opened her eyes and turned toward him when she heard Howard say, "What say we adjourn this meeting to more comfortable surroundings?" All 4 men said that was a great idea, so they all 7 straightened their clothes for the walk through the lobby to the elevators. Soon, each woman stopped at the door to her room. Howard opened them and grandly gestured the lovers into their rooms. He followed Amy and her men into her room, and then opened the door connecting the 2 rooms. Amy's lovers gently guided her to the bed, and all of them started their orgy. Just before 1 p.m., Janet came through Amy's door. She still looked tired, but was dressed in her business suit. Amy, honey, you have to get up and get dressed. Howard has the signed contracts and is on his way back to pick us up. We only have about 3 hours to check out and make our flight home. Amy groaned and forced herself to get up. Her whole body ached. She hoped she didn't look as bad as Janet did. Janet guided her into the shower and packed her bags while she was cleaning up. Amy was in her underwear when Howard knocked on the door. When she found out whom it was, Janet just opened the door for him. Amy screamed and tried to cover herself when she saw Howard enter the room. Howard laughed and walked up to her. He said, "Oh, come on, Amy. I saw everything you have last night. Why are you trying to hide it from me now? Hell, I screwed you 3 times last night. Now cut out the false damn modesty and kiss me." When he finished talking, Howard pulled Amy to him and gave her a deep kiss. Janet looked at Howard over Amy's shoulder and mouthed, "Bingo." Howard nodded his head and withdrew from Amy. He licked his lips and said, "Tasty. Now hurry up and get ready. We don't want to miss our flight." Thankfully, the girls got some more sleep on the flight home, so they didn't look too bad when their husbands picked them up at the airport. Howard smiled and shook each man's hand as he said, "You guys ought to be proud of these two. I don't think I would have gotten the contract signed without them, and I am positive we wouldn't have got as good a price without their help. Now take them home and let them know how much you've missed them this week." He turned to Janet and Amy and said, "I'll see you in the office Monday, you two." Amy couldn't look Jeffrey in the eyes that entire evening. She was so scared he could tell she had taken a lover. She was sick. When Jeffrey asked her what she had done during the evening, she said, "Oh, we had supper with the customers and visited a while, then I went back to my room." While she was saying that, Amy got sick at her stomach and ran into the bathroom and threw up. Jeffrey was worried about her and followed her into the bathroom. "Honey, are you okay?" he asked. Amy was crying and throwing up. Between heaves, she said, "Yeah, my stomach has been upset since lunch. We had some greasy Mediterranean food and the spices have gotten to me. I'm really tired. I think I'll go to bed now." On Monday morning, Amy and Janet were sitting talking during the morning break when Howard once again came into the outer office. He smiled at both girls and passed out the bonuses. They were once again in cash. Janet got $15,000 and Amy got $10,000. Amy felt gushed when she remembered what she had done to earn her bonus. The weeks progressed and Amy was called on to travel 1 or 2 times a month. More and more often, Amy had to work late, and she occasionally had Saturday meetings. She didn't get a bonus for every meeting, but whenever the meeting resulted in an income stream for the company, she did. Jeffrey was getting angry and complaining about her hours. About 3 months after the first meeting Amy set up by herself, Janet came to work one morning very upset. She had been crying and cried off and on all morning. Just before she left for lunch, Janet told Amy she might be late because she had a doctor's appointment. Janet never came back to work that day. The next morning, Janet came to work looking like she hadn't slept at all. As soon as Howard came in, Janet gave Amy a small smile and walked into Howard's office. They were there for over a half hour. When she came out, Janet had been crying again and was pale as a sheet. She looked at Amy and said, "Howard wants to see you." When Amy walked into Howard's office, he pointed to a chair and said, "Close the door." After Amy sat down, Howard looked at her, then leaned back in his chair. He laced his fingers together and rested his hands on his stomach. Howard sighed and said, "Amy, Janet is going to take a new job next month. I know you were planning on another year learning from her before she would have normally been promoted, but something has come up and she will leave sooner. I have to ask, do you want her job as my administrative assistant? You know there are a lot of late nights and trips involved. Do you think Jeffrey will cause trouble? I would guess you would be doing about 1/3 more after hours and traveling than you do now, even with the assistant and I will have to find for you." Amy was shocked at Janet's abrupt departure and excited about the new position. Not only was the salary double what she now made, but also the bonuses were much greater. She had been an assistant for only about a year now, and she already had about $100,000 in bonus money stashed in her safe deposit box. She had intended telling Jeffrey about it when she first began getting it, but couldn't think of a way to make it sound legitimate since it was paid in cash. Since it was under-the-table money, she had not reported it for income tax purposes either. After a few meetings, she got to thinking if Jeffrey ever found out what she was doing, she might need the extra money to live on if he let's be honest here, when he divorced her. As a result, Amy had quite a secret stash now, and the new position would help her add to it rapidly. Janet's bonuses were from half again to twice what she got for each meeting they both attended. After Howard and she ironed out the transition, Amy walked back into the outer office. Janet's eyes were bloodshot, and she had a damp tissue in her hand. Amy wrapped her arm around Janet and asked, "What's wrong, Janet? Is there anything I can do to help?" Janet shook her head no and whispered, "I'm pregnant. Danny and I have been planning on starting a family, but I'm not sure it's his." "Oh, Amy, I think I got pregnant on the coast at that first meeting you set up. I had forgotten I was off the pill until after we started playing, then it was too late. I didn't remember until the next morning, and there was no way to get the morning after pill. I finally convinced myself I would be safe, but I don't think now I was. The timing is wrong for this to be Danny's child. I don't know what to do. If I get an abortion, I'm afraid Danny will find out, and if I don't, I'm afraid he can tell the child isn't his. Oh, what am I going to do?" That night, Amy went home early. She could hardly wait for Jeffrey to get home so she could tell him about her promotion. Unfortunately, when she told him, he was far from happy. In fact, he asked, "Is there any way you can get out of it? I hate you being gone as much as you are, and I sure don't want you to be gone more. Why don't you just quit or change jobs?" Amy was angry and shouted, "Oh, it's okay for you to have late business meetings and work 50+ hours a week, but I can't? Well, Mr. Big Shot, my job is as important to me as yours is to you. Besides, I am meeting important, powerful men that can help us get ahead and out of this little town. Also, I'll be making the same amount as you now, and will have the responsibility to go with it. You have to work late and travel, and so do I. If you can't be happy for me, live with it. If everything goes well, I should be in a job that requires a lot less travel and late nights in a couple of years, then we can enjoy the things we used to do again." Things were tense for the next several weeks, but Jeffrey's still unwilling to accept Amy's job and work hours. He was upset because their sex life took another nosedive. Amy now got home very late 1 or 2 nights a week, but he adjusted. What really upset him, though, were the weekend meetings. It seemed like at least once a month Amy had to either stay over to Saturday or Sunday at a meeting away from home, or she had to leave early Sunday to get to one on time. He couldn't understand that and never got an acceptable answer from her about it. After Amy had been in her job 6 months, she came home looking upset. Her eyes were red from crying, and she was holding a wet handkerchief. Jeffrey walked to her and asked, "Amy, honey, what's wrong?" She plastered herself into Jeff's chest and hugged him to herself tightly. "I had a drink after work with Janet, and she told me Danny was divorcing her. You know, she got pregnant and had to find a less stressful job when I got the early promotion? Well, when she had the baby, it was black. Danny was in the delivery room with her, and when he saw the baby come out, he looked at Janet and said, 'You cheating witch. You and your spawn can go to hell.' Janet said he just walked out of the room, and she hasn't seen him since. He didn't come get her to take her home, and when she got to the house, the door locks had been changed. She was served with divorce papers at work, and he refuses to talk to her." Jeffrey looked at Amy and asked, "How did she get pregnant?" He looked funny, then said, "You know what I mean. How did it happen? Was she a cheater or what? The few times I met her, and when we went out with her and Danny, I thought she was so in love with Danny. Heck, I'm surprised she even found time to cheat if she was as busy as you are." Jeff's eyes got big, and he blurted out, "Those damn business trips and late nights. She was cheating on Danny then, wasn't she? Why did you put up with that?" Jeffrey stopped in the middle of the sentence and looked at Amy in shock. Amy felt herself blanch, then she turned red as she stared into the eyes of her husband. What she saw there scared her. She felt her stomach clench and felt her knees begin to shake. She started to cry when she heard Jeff say, "Have you been cheating on me at those meetings?" Amy moaned out, "No. I've been hit on a lot, but no. I never." Jeff broke into her sentence and said, "You damn well better not have been. I've been worried for months that something was wrong with all this. Now I think I know. If I ever find out you screwed around on me, it's over. You'll be out that damn door with nothing, just like the prenup says." He turned and walked back into the den while Amy stared at his back and cried. The next morning, a Thursday, Amy was opening the door into the garage when she yelled to Jeff, "I'll be late again tonight, honey. We have another late presentation on the Stover proposal." Just after yelling that information to her husband Jeffrey, she hurried out the garage door, hoping she could get in her car before he responded or caught her. Amy sighed as the door closed with no comment from Jeffrey. While driving down the street toward her office, Amy wished there was a way to curtail her late nights and weekends before Jeffrey got so upset he did something foolish. Amy loved Jeffrey to death, or at least she thought she still did. Her new job and its responsibilities not only took a lot of her time and energy, but it left her very little time to spend with Jeffrey and even less opportunity to take care of him sexually. In fact, the social responsibilities of her new job left her exceedingly satisfied sexually, and she loved the bonus money. That the very virile men she was screwing were rich and powerful was just icing on the cake. If she played her cards right, she was sure one of them could help her and Jeffrey get a better job in a real city. Amy knew she only had another year, or maybe a little more in her position before her boss found another administrative assistant. Janet, the woman she had replaced, made it clear that the clients tired of the same entertainment over time, and she needed to put her all into it for as long as she could. Normally, Howard kept an administrative assistant about 2 years. If she had been successful in her job as Howard's assistant, she could obtain another highly paid position within the company, or he would help her find another job of comparable or better salary with another company. Normally, after she left her job as his administrative assistant, if she stayed with the company, she would only be called upon a few times a year to help his current assistant with projects. Of course, from time to time, one of the salesmen or customers might request time with her. Janet had told her as the years progressed that possibility became less and less. Personnel changed, and they didn't know of the past assistants, or they preferred the new younger ones. Amy thought about her job and the money she and Jeffrey were making. She wished he would take a better job. She just had to convince one of her contacts to offer him a better job and to take it. If he made more money, she probably wouldn't have taken the job as Janet's secretary. Well, at least she wouldn't have kept it after she found out about the social part of it. She was scared Jeff would find out what she was doing, but she wanted to make big dollars and live the good life so badly she was willing to take the chance. Amy giggled to herself and thought, let's be honest here too. Most of the time the sex with the various executives and salesmen was out of this world good. She got a huge thrill just from sleeping around on Jeff, and occasionally she got a really great coxman to boot. Of course, she did hope she could parlay her friendship with some of the movers and shakers into better paying jobs for herself and Jeffrey also. She sighed. Jeffrey was a business analyst for gosh sakes. He had an MBA degree from Wharton School of Business and was only making $64,000 per year working for that sappy company in his hometown. Sometimes she wondered what the heck a feed and farm supply store needed with analysis of companies they did business with. She had tried repeatedly to get him to leave and take a better job, and every time he refused. When Amy got home, she found a note from Jeff. He told her he had to go to Steelville and consult with the management of the feed and farm supply store. He knew since it was in the middle of the week, she wouldn't take off from her job, so he just packed and left. His note continued, "Since I'll be home for the meeting, I think I will spend a few days visiting the folks. I'll probably be home sometime early next week. If you need me, call my cell or Dad and Mom. I'll probably stay with them or in one of the cabins at the resort." Amy felt her jaws clench in anger. She didn't know what the hell he saw in that damn hick town. The population of the whole damn town was just a little over 1,000. The next larger town was 25 miles away, and it only had 10,500 or so population. That is why she had insisted they work here in Springville. At least the town was large enough they had some nightlife, not that they managed to get out much. Even before she took her new job, Jeff had refused to go out much. She had to force him to join the country club, and then he almost never went out there. Imagine a grown businessman that only played golf when he had to. Why in the world he would rather fish and hunt was beyond her understanding. She wished they had managed to live in a town with more than 150,000 population, but this was as far as Jeff was willing to move from his precious home, 70 freaking miles. Jeff hadn't told anyone he was coming home, so when he pulled into his parents' driveway, he wasn't surprised to see they were gone. He figured they were either in town having supper or over at one of the family's homes. Since it was only a short way down the road, he went to his grandfather Fielding's home first and hit pay dirt. The whole family was out on the patio having a party. When he walked around the corner, his sister saw him first and screamed, "Jeff, my God, what drug you away from the big city?" She ran up to him and gave him a big hug. The rest of the family wasn't too far behind. All were glad to see him. After the greetings had died down, Jeff asked what the party was in honor of. They told him, and he was embarrassed. He had forgotten it was his sister's baby's second birthday, and they were celebrating. Jeff sank into a chair with a sigh and gratefully drank down the shot of Glenlivet his grandfather handed him. He held his glass out for a refill as he felt his muscles start to relax. Even over the children's screams and laughter, he could hear the trickling of the nearby stream flowing over the rocks and the ripple on its way to the swimming hole. From time to time, Jeffrey caught his grandmother and watching him. Once he saw her whispering to his mother, father, and grandfather Jim. The party slowly wound down and everybody left except for Jeffrey, his grandparents whose house this was, and his parents. They all drug up chairs and faced him. His grandmother spoke for the group when she said, "Okay, son, out with it. You come in here in the middle of the week without your wife and look like somebody stole your favorite toy. Now cut the crap and tell us what's wrong in Springville." Jeff sat and stared at the old woman in shock. Was he that obvious? He opened his mouth and closed it. He took a deep breath and sighed. Finally, he said, "I don't know if anything's wrong, but sometimes I just feel like Amy's." "Out with it, boy." "Amy's what?" his grandmother asked. "Amy's cheating on you, or leaving you, or what? Come on now." I recognized that look. God help me, I've seen it before. All the other adults looked at each other and his grandmother blushed a little. He remembered she and his grandfather had been divorced a little over 4 years, then remarried when their second mates had died in a traffic accident. Could the divorce have been because Grandma and cheated on Grandpa Jim? Jeff sighed and shook his head. "I just don't know," he said. "I can't find any evidence, but I have strong suspicions." She was secretary to the administrative assistant at Harriman for several months. She had to dress nicer, but her dress and makeup were more like she was on the prowl than working in a business. She had to work late several nights a month and took an overnight trip several times. After any of those nights, she wouldn't have anything to do with me sexually. She did everything she could to avoid me those nights up to, and including starting arguments. You know, when the admin assistant took another job, she got to be admin assistant. She is away from home at least one night a week until after midnight, and once or twice a month she has to take a 2 to 4 day business trip with Mr. Harriman. Almost all the trips begin or end with one full day of the weekend in them. Amy refuses to talk about her job and refuses to quit doing it. She keeps saying she only has to hang in there for a year or two, and she can apply for a less demanding job and almost be assured of getting it. It's like there is no competition when the time comes. I have done some research, and almost all Mr. Harriman's administrative assistants have held the job for 2 years after holding the assistant's job for anywhere from 1 to 2 years. All his assistants are young, in their early to late 20s and married. He seems to have something for married assistants. I couldn't find one of his past assistants that had been single. I am positive some would have applied for the job and been well suited for it. Perhaps better suited than a married woman because they were freer to travel. Apparently, some administrative assistant secretaries don't work out because many of them leave at the end of their 6-month probation period. Everyone that lasted past 6 months has gone on to be Mr. Harriman's admin assistant. All the admin assistants got a job that paid the same or more if they stayed with the company, or a job that had similar compensation if they left. Additionally, I found 3 of the assistants' marriages ended in divorce because they were caught cheating during some of the business meetings and/or trips. Amy was only administrative assistant secretary about 1 year because her boss got pregnant and left the position. About 6 months after she left, she had a child and her husband filed for divorce. The child was black and Janet and her husband were both white. As often as they had business meetings and took business trips, Janet almost had to become pregnant on company business. By my estimation, taking into consideration Amy's schedule, she only had about 3 nights a week when she would be home with her husband, and if she was like Amy, she crashed and burned those nights. When Amy told me about her ex-boss, I am afraid I let my mouth outrun my brain. I said the first thing that popped into my mind. I have been getting more and more upset and angry with Amy and her damn schedule, and I popped off. As best as I remember, I said, "What happened?" "You know what I mean. How did it happen? Was she a cheater or what?" The few times I met her, and when we went out with her and Danny, I thought she was so in love with Danny. Then, when I watched Amy's face, I had a thought and blurted out, "Those damn business trips and late nights. She was cheating on Danny then, wasn't she? Damn it, you were with her a lot of the time. Why did you put up with that?" I remember looking at Amy in shock as the idea first hit my brain. I saw her blanch, then she turned red as she stared at me. She looked scared and started to cry when I said that. Then I asked her, "Have you been cheating on me at those meetings?" Amy said she hadn't, but she had been hit on a lot. I remember telling her, "You damn well better not have been cheating. I've been worried for months that something was wrong with all this. Now I think I know. If I ever find out you screwed around on me, it's over. You'll be out that damn door with nothing, just like the prenuptial agreement says." Then I left her standing, and I walked into the den while she cried. This morning before she left, Amy yelled down the hallway at me that she had another late-night meeting to service an account. I know it's supposedly her job, but I just don't see why Howard needs 2 women with him at every meeting to help him take care of his customers and suppliers unless there is something fishy going on. I guess I came home partly to see if you would authorize the investigation company to check up on Howard and Amy. Of course, I wanted to see all of you too. I'll pay for the investigation out of my funds, but I need your permission to authorize the change in work for Homer. All the older Fieldings leaned back in their chairs after Jeff finished. Finally, his father, Paul, said, Son, there seems to be something wrong with the picture you painted, but for the life of me, I can't say what at this point. From what you have told us about Amy in the past, this could be something she would do. You know how she feels about the excitement of larger cities and her need for the nightlife.